Thank you, everybody. So we are going to continue this, I think, in a conversational vein, if we can. And thank you so much, Professor Lu, for, I would say, actually, that's a genuinely fascinating lecture, because I think it brings out a lot of the elements that we need to understand. If you want to understand this Tansing, the heart sort of connection. And I think one of the things that we didn't say earlier in the Singapore panel was that one of the key aspects, essentially, to connections and the formation of a new community culture is precisely that. The aspect, essentially, where two people meet each other as people. It's not about the age, it's not about the gender, it's just one person meeting another. You could be 18 meeting someone who was 80, and you see the commonality, basically, between the two people. I think the other issue here that I kind of pick up on that's probably quite important as a glue, to our kind of Asian society's ability to navigate filial piety in a reciprocal, healthy sort of way is very much, I think, also constructed around that idea that even within a family is not, I tell you what to do, but rather actually the different generations connect with each other again as human beings and are able to say, okay, let's talk about this and let's work through this together with that kind of respect. So I think merit by competence, reciprocal, filial piety, all these concepts I think are very closely linked to two people or group of people being willing to meet each other again just as people, right? I think if I'm not wrong, I think that's kind of what I really take away from this. And I completely take on board the point, I think, that you also make, because I think it was also true of our focus groups as well, that it needed to be facilitated in two stages. One stage to allow the prejudices and the general way we see each other to come out, and then the creation of a safe enough space that actually you could put them all together to say, okay, let's talk about this safely and let's really sort of address it. So I think these things are really important as a part of what we're trying to do to create real intergenerational solidarity. I think this is. I'm going to invite, I think, the panelists, I think, to just give maybe 5 minutes, to 7 minutes of reflections within a variety of contexts. I mean, Singapore is again sort of represented here, but also, Malaysia and the context of Malaysia, also multi-ethnic, multi-religious society, and Japan, to, tell us a little bit actually about how in your society, in your culture, how are you going to take on board the things that Professor Lewis said to structure the more fair sharing of resources, but not just in a transactional sort of way where people actually really sort of meet each other? And what are the sort of strengths and weaknesses of the community bonds or the intergenerational bonds that currently exist in your country that you think need to be addressed or can be harnessed actually to help the situation so that we can build, this kind of intergenerational society? Maybe I'll invite Tunku Aizan to go first.
I will Thank you. And thank you, Tsao Foundation, for inviting me to be here today. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Distinguished guests, fellow speakers, ladies and gentlemen. Actually, it is an honor for me today to reflect on a subject that is both timeless and urgent. How values can foster intergenerational solidarity and equity in a multi-ethnic society like Malaysia. And my focus will be on Muslim families because there's a lot to talk about it. And as a multi-religious and multi-ethnic nation, Malaysia's diversity is often seen as a challenge, but it is also our strength, particularly when we examine how different communities uphold values of respect, care, and reciprocity across generations. Today, I will speak specifically on the standpoint of Muslim families while acknowledging broader national dynamics. For example, like in Islam, the concept of bin al-wadin, a dutifulness to parents, is fundamental, and it is a Quranic imperative placed immediately after the commands to worship Allah alone. And we have enjoined upon man care for his parents. That is under Surah Al-Kahf, ayat 15. This obligation forms the moral bedrock of intergenerational care. It is not merely cultural, it is a divine mandate. Elders are to be honored, cared for, and never cast aside. At the same time, Islam promotes rahmah. Rahmah is a word for compassion and as a reciprocal value. Parents show mercy to children and children reciprocate in old age. The other concept that is related to this relationship is takaful, or mutual responsibility, underpins the Islamic conception of the family. It encourages not only material care, but also emotional and spiritual nurturing across generations. These values promote solidarity by not just within nuclear families, but across extended family kinship. And however, I must be honest actually, there are also pressures faced by Muslim families today. Urbanization, migration, and economic stress are changing social norms, may have reshaped the family values and the family structures. These challenges stands out. First, erosion of the extended family, with more young children out migrating and things like that. Many older persons are left behind, often in the rural or peripheral urban areas. Second, the care burden. Women, particularly daughters and daughters-in-law, shoulder a disproportionate share of elder care, which raises equity concerns. Third, generational disconnectedness. Younger generations are growing up in the digital age, as mentioned by Prof. Lu and our colleagues earlier in the panel this morning, that they can create a distance from elders' traditional wisdom and practices. These challenges threatens the transmission of values that once naturally flowed across generations. In this environment, then, we need both value reinforcement and structural support. The third one is how do we enforce then intergenerational solidarity that they are changing right now? And I think three things that we can think about in terms of revalorize Islamic family ethics in contemporary life through education, media, and religious institutions, and we must revitalize the concept of amanah, that the young have a trust to protect and uplift the whole, and family-based obligation must be balanced with public responsibility. Next is promote equitable caregiving roles. Islam honors caregiving as a noble deed, but equity requires that care is not borne by women alone. We must engage men, promote shared caregiving, and support working caregivers with social policies, including flexible working arrangement and financial support. Third, we need to bridge intergenerational divide through platforms from shared knowledge and mentorship, programs such as cafe. We call cafe keluarga or family cafes, intergenerational religious study circles or community-based hubs, and foster stronger intergenerational bond rooted in mutual respect and learning. So, ladies and gentlemen, in Islam, the family is both a social institution and a spiritual sanctuary. It is where values are transmitted and social cohesion is nurtured. In our multi-ethnic context, these values of care, duty, compassion, and reciprocity can serve as a bridge, not as boundaries. Yeah? By reinforcing this ethical foundation and adopting this to modern realities, we can sustain a Malaysia where no generation is left behind and every generation contributes to a just and caring society. So thank you for my first round.
Thank you, Tunku Aizan, for a very comprehensive sweep, I think, of the issues. And I think that some of the things that Tunku Aizan, I think, has said are very important for all of us to sort of bear in mind, think about. and also for the subsequent maybe presenters, if you've got the ability, you've got the time, to sort of address. But I think one thing is this intergenerational thing, I think, is a lot of policy making. We always say policy making needs to be evidence-based. I think what we're hearing through today is that actually in this particular arena, in longevity, a lot of our policy making is not so much evidence-based as values-based, first and foremost, and then evidence-informed. So I think this is the Asian approach, and I think this is really interesting, and I see that very strongly actually from Professor Lu's presentation. The second, I think, sort of issue here is particularly around, again, picking up from Professor Lu's point, picking up this thing about, making sure that there's a balance, right? There's public responsibility, state responsibility versus family responsibility. And striking that balance, I think, in all of our collective societies is going to be really important. And I'm just going to roll one question that's basically come up from the Pigeonhole Q&A thing. It's a good question. Increasingly, Asian society is becoming very westernized and individualized as well. So how will filial piety survive, actually, in this landscape as well? So I'm going to pass on to, Professor Tan, basically to continue the reflections on Singapore, and, maybe you can, give us some views on some of these things. And I think this is the, this for the slide. Keep questions coming on the Pigeonhole.
Hello. So for me, I actually started my interest in intergenerational approach, intergenerational relations, and approach from an extra familiar perspective. That means I wrote a dissertation that is an ethnography of an age-integrated institution in Japan that's combining childcare centers and old folks facilities. So I started from that angle, and then when I finished my dissertation, when I graduated, I came back to Singapore in late 1990s. We started to have trying to, I was very interested. I'm still very interested in trying to promote more of such opportunities for generations to come together, not as a family unit, but in a community. And when I started to share about, such extra-familiar kind of context, people always ask me, isn't this about grandparents and grandchildren? Okay, that was back in 1990s. So with that, then I realized that, in our society, a lot of this intergenerational relationship actually is couched within the kind of family kind of sphere. So for those of you who are into the aging space in Singapore, remember, like in 1999, we have the Interministerial Committee IMC report, right? When there was, I think, probably the first time in the aging policy deliberation that they had a work group on cohesion and conflict in an aging society. So this report is available online in the National Library Board. So the subtitle of that chapter was Reinforcing Intergenerational Cohesion. Okay, so and policy recommendations were actually centered very much on strengthening family values. Okay, so this whole idea of intergenerational togetherness has at least 20, 30 years back very much couched within the family sphere, and talking about how you promote extended family ties, reciprocity. And suggestions in that report, including teaching of family values in school textbooks, should also include grandparents in the picture, as an integral part of the family structure. So it was very intentionally to try to promote that extension of family. And then it also, of course, very much tried to highlight the fact that the role of the family it's important in provision of care for the older members. Okay, so if you're interested, you can always go and look at the report. But I remember there's this paragraph here that says, of course, the young should also be taught the importance of extended family. However, this should not result in grandparents taking over the role of the parents in the family. So I can imagine probably there was, discussion about how we need to recognize the fact that grandparents are very important in taking care of the grandchildren full time, especially in Singapore, right? Because grandparents sometimes take care of the grandchildren because they feel that, that the daughters, especially, has already, studied so much. They shouldn't be staying at home, so they should be working, contributing to the society. So, but to be able to want to take care of your grandchildren, in fact, can be quite a taxing a journey, right? Can be quite taxing physically, and it also affect their own social life. That's why some grandparents, have always to negotiate with the children and say, if I take care, I can only take care until 6 p.m. You must be home after that, right? Yeah. So, but I think that phrase to say that grandparents should not take over the role of the family, of the parents, I think really shows that, how older adults do play a very significant role in the family, providing the intergenerational support, in family and beyond. And it's a good reminder that intergenerational support should not always be seen as the older one as the one that's receiving. The older person, the older generation should be recognized equally in their contributions in this intergenerational exchange. Yeah, so am I supposed to talk on, or do you just...
It's a conversation, so if you've got any more to add to the conversation, do add on.
So maybe I would just pass on to, for...
Thank you.
We were asked to prepare like 7 minutes talk, so...
I think that this is a conversation. It's not so much a talk as, because I think one of the things that is really that you really do bring out is that grandparents should not take over the parenting. But if we pass over to Emmy now, things like the Kodomo Shokudo is even beyond grandparents taking over the parenting. Is a whole generations of old people actually now having to look after a lot of young people, a lot of children actually that are not receiving care. Right. So if I pass on to you, maybe you can give us a reflection on what's happening in Japan.
Yeah. So I studied architecture for many years. So I rely on to images. And I look at the programs through space a lot of times. So I prepare a PowerPoint presentation to show you some examples coming from Japan, actually. Let's hope. So just to recap, I was born and raised in a 4-generation household myself. I had a great-grandparents and great-grandparents and my parents. And so that was 1970s, and Japan has changed. So this is a demographic sort of information. I think the big difference that you see from Singapore and Japan, the differences are that we have population decrease on the top of our aging population. So that is becoming a challenge for us. So it's I think it's about 2 working age people are supporting one older person at this moment. In 2065, it will be 1.3 persons supporting one older person. So it is the situation is not so encouraging for younger generations. Also, the next one is about how people live in Japan. So Japan has, so we have older populations, and I think it's almost half of, like 50% of the people, the household has someone who are over 65 years old. Among that, 30% of people living by themselves, and another 30% of people live only with spouse. means that 60% of people at the households are occupied by older people or just one more spouse. So because I was very much interested in the intergenerational solidarity here, sorry, I couldn't find the English translated graph. And I just cut and paste from Japan's report. This basically, there was a question about someone who are already engaged in some kind of activities. They feel, and the people who are not so involved in the community activities, they compare the differences. And about 85% of people who are already engaged in the social activities, they feel the purpose of life. Means that it is very important to bring people out to be able to talk to people and meet with people, but how can we do it? So we talked about like intergenerational interaction. I hear a lot. I'm still learning about this. So this is not the final product. But basically, there are some different functions that people seem to be talking about, like caregiving, social bonding, connectivity, and community engagement, and mentorship, and all this. So it's about 6 different functions of intergenerational activities that's happening based in Japan's background. And when you look at the place type, again, we all talk about intergenerational. So I just wanted to make a little bit structure to this. It's about co-living is one, and co-located facilities and services, and public spaces, just intergenerational activities happening in the public space. Community hub, like I was being involved in the Basho and also other community hub, and educational institution, intergenerational activities are happening, and intergenerational workspace, virtual space. The last one is temporary space. We create a pop-up space, or we just come up with, this is exactly the temporary place for intergen. But this is the kind of place type we are talking about. And I just want to give you a snapshot of like what's happening in Japan. And I have a focus on intergenerational places, activities done by community members. Because again, Japan has an issue with demographic shift, but it also that created different family structure. We are not like in Singapore, like Len will go to the parents' home for dinner on Sunday. I have to take 2 flights to go back to my parents' home, even though I'm living in Japan. So the situation is very different. So the community's role is very, very important. So this is intergenerational apartment complex. So this is actually what I've been learning is the integration of older and younger generation and also people with disabilities. So this is a household. It's in the middle of Tokyo that anyone can actually live there. And it's all rental units. And this is intentionally built place. It's in Kanazawa. So they created a community intentionally for intergen. So they have elder care, they have children's daycare center. They also have onsen for the people who come from a neighborhood. This is how it's look like during the day. So this is, it's called multi-generational, multifunctional community hub. So the international organization, JICA, has these volunteer activities. And those volunteers, when they come back to Japan, they don't have place to work in a meaningful way. So they created a place where they can actually come. So they have different languages. So that all these foreigners living in Japan will come. So as children and older people. So they have children's daycare care center and the place for people with disability to work, older people living there. So it's a lot of activities are multifunctional. So there's onsen, and they have restaurants and the community market and community living room space. So people are not really doing activities, but they share the space together. And this is a place where it used to be a shopping center. They closed it up because, again, this population decrease. So this was a wonderful place. I just came back last month. This is a supermarket. They decided to make it into nursing homes.
And they decided to have 5 different facilities around: the nursing home, daycare center, and the restaurants, and they have laundromat. So basically to bring people from outside in. So it's not only multi-generational, but it is multifunctional place. Because they have a lot of seating place and play space for children. And this is how seating place is. This is the entrance. There's even have like no door. So people will come in. And this is another one. It used to be an old bathing space. It couldn't really continue. So they gave half of the space into co-working space. And this was a very lively place because older people were taking a bath. And then after that, they have a co-working space. That's where 30s and 40s people will go, right? And this is an older estate. Just try to revitalize a place for young people to come. So the first floor is transformed into coffee shop and all the other fashionable place. The upstairs, older people live. The first floor is occupied by young people and shops. This is another intergen activities. This was a very old housing estate, like a HDB. They were supposed to bring it down, and older people did not want this to be destroyed because that they used to the memory. So they created the place, transformed into beer brewery and a coffee shop, and they have a children's daycare center. It's all cleaning is done by people with disabilities. But basically, just try to transform as much as they can. And the community is bringing all this shopping for the people who cannot walk. They have shopping cart and kitchen cart. This is in the city. They are having a community gardens. So successful patterns that I have observed based on my observation still it's ongoing. But it's an image of non-institutional space, draw people in, a place where children can simply play. Children don't want to just sit down in front of older person doing something. They just want to play. And visual access to indoor, easy walk into the space, differentiated space without wall. Those are really quite exciting challenge for architects. And a normal and attractive environment and availability to foods and drinks and regular patterns of presence of community members. The last one is very important, multifunctional and mixed usage, so that people can have excuse to come in. So I think moving forward, what I think Japan is trying to do is to just try to figure out how to co-create inclusive community where diverse people naturally interact and care for one another. And civic engagement is very important, but we really have to look into what the private sector in social welfare and healthcare role is for the intergenerational community space to be able to have a meaningful activities. And again, to address the different value and the lifestyle of different age group has to be figured out. And the last one is that how can we strengthen the community cooperation and financial support mechanism? It's really a key that everybody talked about. Thanks.
Say something. Yeah, thanks, Amy. I'm always fascinated by the flexibility of space usage. In Japan where we visited end of last year as well. And I remember that once, I think Marianne and I went to Sendai, and we visited this nursing home that has a children's library inside the nursing home, or you have a playground that's on site of the nursing home. I think those are really interesting community, kind of generating a community from services that are so age segregated. And I just hope that we can do more of this in Singapore as well.
Well, let me add something. Because for my PhD thesis, I was doing filial responsibility in a village. And this village is a transitional village because it's close by to Kuala Lumpur. So when I interviewed the older person, they were saying to me that, yes, we are doing the grandparenting because we want our children to work in KL and things like that. But they also said to me that because of that, yeah, they cannot be involved in the community, and because they also said they want their own life. So then that triggers me to see that both perspectives must be involved in this transaction, because the adult children, yes, they want to make a living, and the parents, of course, wants to take care of the grandchildren, because they have to, in terms of, so that the adult children can go to work. But there's also the negotiation of when should it happens, and how should it happens, and things. And I think there is constant negotiation between parents and children in this dimension. And that's another issue that many of us in Asia, especially in Malaysia, we as children provide some financial support to our parents. Okay, and I also interviewed the children. Okay, and some of them says because we provided some financial support to the parents, and I think it is their obligation to support us in care. But from another level of looking at it, we don't really need to pay them for this kind of help, But our support, our financial support, is for their needs. It's not for us to quote unquote pay for their interaction with to care for the grandchildren. So there is the dimension of the meaning of our financial support to our parents, and how does it translate into the interaction. So I think that these are the values that are changing, and we need to really dwell on it, because because for myself, my children give me financial support monthly, and I don't need that. But I accept that, because to me it's just a show of obligation that they are thinking of me, in this situation. But I also use that money support that they gave me for their needs. I don't use it for myself, but those are the kinds of transaction that is the dynamics that is following or is happening in Asian families, especially, because we know that we don't have a solid social protection system, but we depend on each other. We depend on family members for support. But how do you use then that support to benefit yourself or to benefit the next generation? Something like that. That I think we need to think about. Thank you.
Thank you for the different insights, I think, that brought into this as well, because I think this issue, of filial piety, the provision of financial support, and what does it mean, I think is quite critical, because Duke and US, who were one of our partners, working with Tsao on the quality of care transitions sort of work. I mean, what it clearly indicates there also is that filial piety, you can have a very dutiful thought type, and a very dutiful type is perceived as, I give you the money, I give you the domestic worker, my duty is done. And then they walk away, right? It's like, and then there's no quality of relationship there. The tansing is not there, right? The whole thing is not there. So there's this very complicated dynamic, I think, in Asian societies, where we have to look at this balance again between transaction, obligation, but how that also translates actually to a way in which we're trying to, I guess, codify love. It's like, which is, a rather peculiar thing that we're trying to do. I'm going to come to Professor Lu in a moment, because I think that, for example, Emmy's point, I think, and probably Tunku Aizan, the issue that you raised also about the middle generation going off to work in KL, the bowl of soup thing works in Singapore, works in Hong Kong probably, but we need to think about that in terms of how it works in most other countries that are a little bit bigger. And then I think one commonality also that I hear from your presentation, also from Emmy's, is this critical aspect of repurposing space, of particularly space that was created for a youth generation that is now disappearing, or rather a youth pyramid-driven demographic that is now disappearing. And then the question is, how do we repurpose that space actually, for it to function in this kind of intergenerational environment? I'm going to invite you just maybe to make some observations, share maybe some thinking about Hong Kong, or more thinking about Hong Kong.
Yeah, thank you. So can I have the PowerPoint? Can you go to the last slide? I think the last one. Yeah. Yeah, I think this is my last slides. These slides actually focus on three things. The first one is about multi-sector. I would say I have already observed actually in Hong Kong, one of the commercial sector that chip in intergeneration is about legacy. How we can manage money. We all know that globally, the baby boomers are considered as the most rich generation as compared to the oldest old and also the younger, the middle-aged and the young generation, because the young generation is considered as 月光族. Okay. They actually spend their future money already. There's no saving at all and also decreased saving. But how the boomers can actually better constructively manage. So a lot of products is already were there that you can actually split, you can actually do a trust, you can actually do a lot of things. I noticed there's already emerged in the market to make our boomer generation better manage our wealth and also for family and also for our society. So I think the multi-sector contribution and the participation is very, very important. And then the next one is about opportunities. Multi-generation or intergeneration is life, as Paul, you said. It's just the two people, So when we talk about people, life, so it is about everything. It is about learning, it is about living, it is about fun, leisure, and healthcare, and it is about things that we must treasure. And what I would advocate is that I fully treasure that we still have our family tradition, this and that, but we must focus more on the future. That is, we are going to have a significant percentage of people, they're singletons. So traditionally, they are not considered as to a certain extent, maybe biased, a complete family. So we must include them as well. That's why I started to promote community-based intergenerational activities. That means regardless of where you are, whether you have children, grandchildren, and you are still provided opportunities to interact with people at their other age for different purposes, for learning, for living, for fun, for other activities. Otherwise, these people would feel they're being excluded because, you have family, but I don't have family. In Hong Kong, we have a word, all the old people, if they're singletons, they will say, 我係冇人冇物啦，沒有人沒有物。But, so this is too sad, So we have to look after them as a society, as a collective, But of course, last but not least, I think it deserves innovation. Again, multi-sector, multi-generation, and I fully aware that we are going to have innovation. As you may notice that actually in China, that's recently the whole nation is focusing on a new policy focus, that is 一老一小. 一老一小. So all the community, they call it 嵌入式 embedded facilities, they have to serve this purpose. At least you have to serve the old and the young. So that, the government will support you further. So I think this policy shift is also very, very important in Asia. Thank you.
Well, yes, go ahead, please. This is a conversation. Do share. Ling Ling wants her slides back on. Can we put Professor Tang's slides back on, please?
Yeah, I do agree very fully that with our current demographic changes nowadays, and also with the increase of what we call solo aging, right? People who are growing old without a family or childless couples and so forth. And there's really a need to have more focus on the how intergenerational intervention, for example, could help in fulfilling lives. Let me just move on to... It works, huh? Wait. Hey, how come the thing is... wait. Okay, so basically, I would like to take this in, to talk about how we should adopt an intergenerational lens when we talk about, this idea of how society and its members should cultivate this sensitivities of engaging with different generations. So how do we mainstream intergenerational approaches rather than segregating the generations? So as we set up another AAC, Active Aging Center, as we set up another childcare center, as we set up another school or nursing home, how do we, really adopt the intergenerational lens so that we always think about this seemingly single generational kind of services can be beneficial for more than one generations. So in the good news is that in Singapore, although a lot of people will say, we really don't do much, actually, I think we have done quite a bit over the years since the first intergenerational attempt of intergenerational center in 1986. So in a chapter that I wrote about this whole development of intergenerational initiatives in Singapore, I divide them into 3 waves. So the first wave, this is the first wave where, I'm going to just run through. So if you want the slides, you can get it later on. So there are first waves and then second wave, which is more of, how come my things are like kind of jumbled up? So the second wave is more of, this is third wave. How come it kind of, oh, sorry. That's weird. So this is the first wave where we really, in fact, had, the ministry of the previous MSF, in fact, has tried to had a task force looking into intergenerational bonding and grandparenting. And at that time, if some of you remembers, in the 1990s, we do have, quite active programs going on, like even Grandparent of the Year award kind of thing as well. Yeah. And so this program, for example, in below talks about, grandparents saying that, if I know grandchildren are so much fun, I want to have them first. Yeah. So, and wave 2 here, we look at more of from the perspective of active aging in the wave 2. So a lot of intergenerational activity that came on, in fact, was under the under this whole banner of active aging, looking into more focusing on the older people's benefits. And meanwhile, we have also quite a lot of programs that try to rejuvenate the ties between grandparents and grandchildren. So, for example, the one on top talks about how the young should be dating the grandparents, going out to the galleries and so forth. Yeah, and wave 3, I regard the successful aging framework as part of the beginning of wave 3, where there's a lot more policy kind of focus and attention on how do we promote intergenerational programs and interventions in the community. So those of us who are familiar with successful aging framework would know that, like in 2023, one of the important things was talking about connections, right? And increasingly talking about how older people can contribute towards the younger people's life and building relationships. Okay, so so that's the active the wave 3. But the main idea is that, to me, one of the best model would be really more of a co-locations where you have childcare co-locating with nursing homes and so forth. But at the same time, they can be quite challenging. So, for example, in the US, they promote a lot about such facilities, but in reality, they are just the tip of the icebergs in terms of all the childcare services and nursing home services. Okay, so that's weird. How come my slides are jumbled? Because I have 2 more slides that I want to show about things that I thought was really exciting in Singapore. One of it is Methodist Girls' School. I don't know if you're aware, Methodist Girls' School, recently, last year, I think, they changed their computer room. Remember schools always have computer rooms, right? And now we don't use, those computer rooms anymore. And it's really very, exciting that they change it to Intergenerational Center. And it's in the middle of the school where they kind of adopt an open school concept, inviting older people in the community to come into MGS anytime. They can go and, buy food in the canteens, and they can go and sit in the Intergenerational Center. And they can, and there are also various programs that they can engage with the students. For example, in the school art classes for the secondary school art classes, they give spaces for older people to come in and join them in the art class, or join them in the school choir, the CCAs, or orchestra, and so forth. So, to me, I think MGS is really innovative. And I hope many more schools will do that in Singapore. But as we know, you really first have to have really very forward-thinking leadership as well to make this happen. And the next one, and the most recent one I want to just mention is I don't know if you look at the news of Temasek Polytechnic, right? They have, I think, 4 units which used to be, part of the staff housing. They have their 4 units to become assisted living facilities. So these are really, exciting innovations that we have in Singapore. And hopefully we will see much more of those coming forward.
Thank you very much, Ling Ling, because I think your comments are also very germane, I think, to some of the questions that we're getting coming in on Slido. I think I will pick up on these points by saying, going back to what Professor Lu said, actually intergenerational, all this that we're talking about is actually just about life. And it's about the way that life is actually changing, right? In a longevity society. It's changing in ways where, for example, if I look at the questions, more and more women in particular are choosing to remain single and childless. Our families are shrinking. So that alters the dynamics, essentially, of intergenerational society, urbanization, people moving away for work. So actually, a lot of what we're discussing today is actually, to go back to what Dr. Tata started the day with, a part of the interaction of many of our megatrends that's actually creating, this new type of intergenerational dynamic that we actually, are sort of looking at, so the whole repurposing space and all that is part of that. I think that what Professor Tang also raised, I think, is also interesting. The MGS example, very timely, because somebody asked about a question about what would it take for intergen solidarity to be viewed by the youth. And you've just described, a situation where Methodist Girls' School has, taken this forward. But I think one other point also, I think, Emmy, that you said was, when you create these spaces, children should just be allowed to play. I also want to make a reflection that actually, when I think about one of my uncles who retired, his biggest problem, I think, in retirement, and what led, I think, to a significant problem in his quality of life at the end of his life, was he never learned to play. Mm-hmm. Many older people do not know how to play. If you don't know how to play, you cannot retire. So what will we do, not just to encourage, actually, young people to play, but for all of us actually to have a lifelong capacity for play? And that taps into another question here from, the pigeonhole thing, where somebody raised a really good question in the kind of time-constrained, high-pressured environment like Singapore, where will we find time to do intergenerational activities? It's like, so invite reflection.
I think because I was born and raised in Japan, people think that Japan is ahead of us for a lot of things. Yes, we do have very good policies in many places. Yet the challenge I see is that intergen, we have all these policies. We have community integrated care. What's missing is how to implement it. Because intergen, what we really struggle in Japan, the first, children don't come. We create a space, we create activities, children don't come because they can't just simply play. So the place where I showed, when I asked, like comment-wise, I asked children, do you know what kind of place it is? Tell me. The place I play every day after school. And I said, well, this is older people live here and there's people with disabilities cleaning all this place, a special place, right? Well, I don't know. I think that to me, it has a key to it. I think we don't have to put purpose and with signage on it sometimes, the children to be able to just come and play. And because that's the place where they're drawn into. And I think how can we create the relationship? If someone bring Neneng and another student and just let them sit down and talk, that's not the genuine relationship. I think people start to share the space when they come 5 times, when they see 5 times, they start to say hello. I think we should just really start to think about the process of how people make connection when we talk about intergen. Then we can learn how to play from children.
So we go back to Susanna's exercise. This morning is really important for you to do your bingo sheet basically and work out how you get more young people and older people into your columns and learn to play together. I think that's in a kind of a rather critical sort of issue. It looks like we've kind of run out of time. This conversation could go on and on and on, and I'm sure. But we will be covering more and more layers of this. I think the caregiving and the women one will come next. And so, and as I said at the start of the day, the intention here is simply to start conversations. We've started a conversation. It's now up to all of us to take the conversations forward and to figure out how we all work together, basically, to take these things forward. But on behalf of this wonderful panel who really, really indulged me in having a conversation, thank you very much for that. Will you please thank these wonderful panelists for sharing their time and experience?